and we'll have some fun. All right, it's fabulous to see all of you. And today, what I really want to do is begin a kind of formal discussion of an introduction to Foucault, and more specifically into really Foucault's analysis / critique of the Enlightenment as a metaphysical project, right? What we're going to do, what we're going to see in Discipline and Punish, and how we're going to talk about this in this course is we're going to see Foucault provide a postmodern analysis and critique of the Enlightenment as a metaphysical project. And what that means is, Foucault is going to do to the Enlightenment what Nietzsche did to Platonic and Christian and moral and metaphysical philosophy. So as we talked about last week, just as we were just kind of introducing who Foucault is, what his thinking is about, why he was important, as we said last week, Foucault is postmodern, and he is going to develop and almost perfect Nietzsche's postmodern critique of metaphysics. Okay, and so, like I said, Foucault is going to do to the Enlightenment what Nietzsche did to Platonic and Christian moral philosophy and theology. All right, and so just a few things to just kind of remember as a kind of a foundation as we get deeper and deeper and deeper into this. So first, Foucault is a postmodernist. He shares Nietzsche's suspicion. He shares Nietzsche's suspicion about the existence of some type of objective truth. And two, he is concerned. He is concerned. He wants to investigate. He is concerned about the consequences or the effects to our minds and our bodies and our politics that result from our belief in some type of metaphysical truth, and equally as important, to our, not just our belief in some metaphysical truth, but in our commitment to its normative practices, right? It's not just that Foucault is suspicious about, of course, the objective truth, but the big question for Foucault, as we will see, this is what we're going to see in Discipline and Punish, right? The big question for Foucault is, what are the consequences to our minds and our bodies and politics that are a result of our belief in that truth and our commitment to its normative and moral practices? And when he says our commitment to its moral and normative practices, he literally means how we live that belief and that truth, how we live it in our daily lives, and how we conceive of ourselves, how we conceive of our bodies, how we conceive of our normality, how we conceive of our politics and what we're doing, right? And so the first thing always to remember, right, as we start to get deeper into this, right, keep it as a kind of foundation, as an anchoring kind of, okay, when sometimes you get lost in Foucault, right? And you got to kind of step back, look around and say, where the fuck am I? Right? You got to regroup, reground. Say, all right, Foucault's a postmodernist. What does that mean? He's suspicious about the existence of an objective truth, but more importantly, he really wants to investigate and analyze the consequences to our minds and bodies and politics that result from our belief in that truth and our commitment to its practices, right? our moral practices, our mental practices, our political practices, how we conceive of our normality, how we conceive of our body, how we carry our body, right? And most importantly, how we conceive of a certain social and political space. So that's what he's doing, right? And by the way, he's going to do two things. He's going to kind of analyze the Enlightenment as a metaphysical project, and he's also going to force us to bear witness to an alternative account of who we are, what we think mind is, what we think identity is, and what we think reality is. It really, to be that blunt, he's going to kind of force us to bear witness to the possibility, even if it's just as an intellectual exercise. He's going to force us to bear witness to the possibility, even just as an intellectual exercise, that we are not who we think we are, and reality isn't what we think it is. It's just that blunt, right? That's the adventure we're going on. And that's the adventure he takes us on in this book, okay? And more on that when we get to the book, all right? So first, I just want to set that up. That's what's happening here. This is what he's doing. This is his project. Okay, and again, a couple of things to remember. He's a postmodernist, which means he's a nominalist. Language is a human invention. Language, meaning, and value, all of those things are human inventions, right? And not only are they human inventions, they are simultaneously what? Exercises of what? Power. Love you guys, absolutely love you guys. And not only are they human inventions, not only is Nick Dungy's meaning and subjectivity a kind of a human invention, not only am I the effect of a kind of an assertion of linguistic and meaning and value sort of associated power, but because there's he's suspicious of an objective truth, because language is a human invention, because meaning and value and purpose are human inventions, because Nick Dungy's subjectivity is a human invention opened in relationships of power, that means the whole thing is incredibly what? It's contingent. That's right, it's contingent. It's constantly undergoing what? Change and transformation. And not only is it contingent, but to bring in a kind of Nietzschean motif, right? To bring in a kind of Nietzschean motif. And by the way, Foucault becomes famous for bringing in this kind of Nietzschean motif and talking about it the way he does. It's not just that it's contingent, it's agonistic, right? Subjectivity is the effect of power, a type of language as power, meaning and value and purpose as sort of created in language. Language as a human invention, language as an assertion of power. And because there's no metaphysical ground to the language, to the meaning, to the value, to the purpose, because all of that, as essential as it is an assertion of power, it's incredibly contingent, it's unstable, and it's contested, right? Subjectivity is thinking and meaning and value. All of this in this kind of deep Nietzschean way is still quite agonistic for Foucault, right? Consciousness is a field of power relations, he says. The body is a field of power relations. The social and political space is a space of power relations over what things mean, who gets to decide them, what things are valued, what is normal, what's abnormal, what's normal sexuality, what's deviant sexuality. All of these things are kind of relationships of power opened up in language and discourses. All right, and so Foucault's gonna tell us that story. He's gonna tell us the story of us as the effects of relationships of power opened up in a kind of language or a discourse, right? Which I say language, I just mean that generally, loosely, but our discourse as the Enlightenment. All right. So the big key things to always remember Foucault, he's postmodern, suspicious of the truth, interested in analyzing and knowing what the effect, the consequences to our minds, bodies, and politics that result from our belief in the truth and our commitment to its practices. You'll see what I mean later by this, right? And this idea that subjectivity, whatever meaning, whatever value, and ultimately even subjectivity, even Nick Dungy's personality, Nick Dungy's subjectivity, Nick Dungy's individuality, whatever that is for Foucault, it's something that's constructed in language and opened in relationships of power. It's not objectively true. Foucault follows Nietzsche in this idea, right? That subjectivity is a kind of Apollonian form, right? Subjectivity is a kind of Apollonian invention, right? And that at the end of the day, it remains a kind of an invention, and it's kind of unstable. It can be unstable. But at the end of the day, just like for Nietzsche, it's the very fact that it's a kind of an invention, the very fact that it is kind of unstable opens up the potential space for freedom, right? It's in that moment where Foucault, like Nietzsche, is going to say, look, understanding that language is a human invention. It's not objectively real. Understanding that it's an assertion of power, okay? Understanding that the whole thing is contingent. History is nothing but this kind of contingent relationships of power over what words mean, who gets to define them, why. And that agon, that conflict over arcing and bending meaning and identity in different ways. Right? And Foucault's going to say it's in that moment where to riff on a Nietzsche, you and I can become heroic. You and I can kind of see that and then take up the existential responsibility to redefine who we are, to revalue who we are, not to be seized and held and oppressed and marginalized by these meanings of the LSAT, by these meanings of normality, by these meanings of body weight index healthiness, by these fucking meanings and their values and the hierarchy of it all. Right? There's a kind of emancipation, not out of the whole system. No one gets out of the text, right? No one gets out of language. We're all in language. We're always already in the poem, remember? All right, so it's not like anybody gets out, but you can certainly play the game inside the poem in a lot more heroic way, right? Kind of in terms of a kind of an existential responsibility. So that's what's going on with Foucault. All right. Now, what he's going to do, right, is he's going to analyze our discourse, our what's the paradigm, what's the dominant intellectual paradigm of our time. It's the Enlightenment. You and I are the heirs of the Enlightenment. We're children, we're citizens, we're adults of the Enlightenment. Right? That's our kind of paradigm. That's the intellectual, the poem, to put it in a Nietzschean Foucaultian way, the poem, right, that we were born into, right, is the Enlightenment, right? That's the dominant intellectual and scientific philosophical paradigms. It's kind of loosely called the Enlightenment. You and I are born in the Enlightenment. From a Nietzschean and Foucaultian point of view, we're born in the Enlightenment poem. Obviously, from the Enlightenment's point of view, they don't call it Enlightenment. They call it a kind of a paradigm that's a metaphysical. We'll talk about that in a second. All right. So what he's going to do is he's going to kind of, from a postmodern point of view, kind of analyze the Enlightenment. All right. And not just analyze the Enlightenment from a postmodern point of view, but here's the key, right? And again, this will take a little time to sink into your head, but once it does, it's gonna blow you away. What he does is not just gonna analyze the Enlightenment, but he's gonna say, right? What are the consequences to our minds? You and I, you as students at CSUN living at the end of 2020, me as a professor at CSUN in this quintessential Enlightenment institution. What are the consequences to our minds, to our bodies, and to our politics that result What are the consequences to us right now? I don't even mean it in an abstract way. Literally, right now, I'm in Prague talking. You're in various places in the world sitting. Your student's about to graduate. I'm a professor about to retire. We're just watching this kind of modern Enlightenment paradigm, shatter to its conclusion. Like, what are the consequences to our minds, our bodies, and politics that result from our belief in, more on that coming in just a sec, right? From our belief in the truth of the core principles of the Enlightenment and our commitment to its practices, right? And literally, when I say our commitment to its practices, I'm not being abstract. I mean, literally, most of you are going to your political science majors. You spent 4 or 5 years in this thing called the university, which is a quintessential Enlightenment invention, right? Designed to produce political scientists, right? Who have aptitude, Foucault will call, have acquired some knowledge, right? Become highly self-disciplined, become professional, right? And you've done that for all sorts of important societal and economic and personal reasons. And then we're going to give you diplomas. We're going to send you out into the world, and you're going to go fix shit. Right? You're going to take your political science degree and you're going to fix families, or you're going to fix economic policy. You're going to become legislative aid, or you're going to go fix shit, which is a great Enlightenment obsession. Using reason to fix shit, to make the world better. Right? So when I say, what are the consequences to our minds, our bodies, and our politics that result from our belief in a kind of objective truth, in this case, the story of the Enlightenment, and our commitment to its practices. Literally, you as political science majors, doing what you're doing and thinking about it the way you do, right? And then taking all that knowledge and going out into Northridge or going out into Los Angeles and fixing shit in the name of some truth, progress, as a metaphysical idea. The book is literally us, right? We're gonna take this journey, right? And the journey is going to force us to have a different view of us. Literally, who the hell we are, and where we are, and what we're doing, and why we're doing it. That's the project. Okay? All right. So before we get too deep into that project, right, we really need to say a few words about the Enlightenment, right? What does Foucault think he's analyzing / interrogating? What is it? What I keep saying, right? Foucault is going to do to the Enlightenment what Nietzsche did to Platonic philosophy and Christian theology. And so, okay, so what does that mean? And at least for the purposes of this class, and as Foucault is kind of structure it, what does he mean by the Enlightenment? And what does he mean by the Enlightenment as a metaphysical project, right? What does he mean by the Enlightenment? And what does he mean by the Enlightenment as a metaphysical project? Okay, and that's what I want to do tonight. And it's really important, one, just to kind of know what it is that Foucault is analyzing / critiquing, right? And then to begin to see that as us, right? To become fully aware we're the heirs of this project. We're the heirs of this poem, all right? And so the first thing we need to do, and this is the key to Foucault, and again, it's in this outline. So get it out there, because it's like kind of structured here, and it flows in a certain way. And if you get the structure and you get the flow, you're well on your way to mastering Foucault. Okay. And so the first thing we need to do is to understand, or just think of, the Enlightenment as a metaphysical system of thought. Right. And again, nothing new under the sun here, right? We have said throughout this course in one way, I probably bored the tears out of you guys in this way, right? We've said in one way or another throughout this course that ever since Plato, right, there have been, and again, this is just loose, this is just for the so we can begin a conversation and move around in it. But generally speaking, since Plato, there have been three major or primary metaphysical systems of thought. There's been philosophy, a kind of Platonic or Kantian, Hegelian philosophy, Marxism as a kind of philosophy that's metaphysical. Ever since Christianity, right, there have been at least three major metaphysical theologies in the West. There's Christianity, right? Christianity emerges in around 325 AD, right, as a religion, as a theology that's metaphysical, right? And now the third big one, thought very generally, is the emergence of the Enlightenment, normative, social, and medical and physical sciences. They're what we in some ways call the scientific paradigm. I'm going to call it Enlightenment in a more inclusive way, right? But there's been three major metaphysical systems of thought: some type of philosophy, Platonic, Kantian philosophy, some type of religion, Islam, Christianity are metaphysical religions, and now the Enlightenment as a kind of normative, social and behavioral and medical and physical sciences, right, project. The Enlightenment as a metaphysical project. And of course, as we've said 100 times, to be a metaphysical project assumes that there's some objective truth out there, that human beings have some access to that, right, that truth, and that the purpose of life is to acquire the knowledge and apply it to oneself, in our case, to be healthy, right, and to acquire knowledge, in this case, political science, to go and make the city better, right? The Enlightenment, from Foucault's point of view, is a kind of quintessentially metaphysical project, right? Okay, so when I refer to the Enlightenment, I mean the emergence of the normative, social, behavioral, medical, and physical sciences that emerged very loosely in the beginning of the 1600s. The Enlightenment begins kind of in the 1600s, begins in the early modernity, right? This project begins, and again, when we talk about the Enlightenment, we're talking about a whole discourse, right? We're talking about a system of thought that emerges slowly around the 1600s, right? Machiavelli gets modernity rolling, Hobbes emerges, right? And Locke emerges, and the medical and all the medical scientists are secretly cutting up cadavers in England in the 1600s and the 1700s, right? The sciences are emerging, right? Cities are emerging, universities are emerging. The Enlightenment, this thing is kind of slowly emerging in the 1600s in various kind of ways, and it's developing and finds a kind of a political culmination in the French Revolution and the American Constitution, right? When we talk about the Enlightenment as a metaphysical project, we're talking about a discourse, man. We're talking something that begins many hundred years ago. It's popping up in various disciplines or areas of thought, science and philosophy and politics and medicine, right? And it's still going. We're still living. We're living at the very end of the Enlightenment, but we're still in it. In fact, we're watching its end. We're watching its coming apart. That's why we're looking at the violence and the chaos and the instability, where we are witnessing the end of a discourse right now, right? A contingent, fragile, ultimately unstable discourse. This is why our times are tumultuous. We are witnessing the end of a discourse, the Enlightenment paradigm. So when I use the word Enlightenment, we're going to talk about it as a metaphysical sense, more on that in just a second. But we're talking about something that begins, slowly in the early 1600s as the first emergence of modern philosophy, or the emergence of modern science, as crude as it was, or the emergence of new ways of thinking politically, or about punishment, right? Foucault is going to tell us the story of the Enlightenment through one example: the emergence of the the Enlightenment conception of punishment. He's going to use that as a kind of story to show us what has happened to us. It's brilliant. Okay, so so the first thing we need to know is think about the Enlightenment as a metaphysical system of thought. And when we refer to it, we mean the emergence, the slow emergence. Oh, and by the way, when this is happening, right, in the 1600s, they're not sitting there thinking, we're inventing the Enlightenment. They're not, nothing didn't happen self-consciously like that. These new systems of thought start to emerge to challenge old systems of thought that aren't working or are breaking down, right? Science comes to replace Aristotelian physics. From the medieval Aristotelian physics that the church used, Galileo comes along and says, Aristotle's crystalline spheres is wrong, man. It's fucking, the universe is elliptical. Right? Copernicus says it's elliptical, right? These ideas emerge slowly as reactions to other paradigms, other systems of thought, right? Again, in this contingent, agonistic, historically unfolding way, as power relations, all right? So the Enlightenment as a kind of emergence of these normative social, behavioral, medical, and physical sciences that start happening in the early 1600s, right? And they kind of emerge and develop. And like I said, we're still living it right now. We are the heirs. You and I are the heirs of an Enlightenment discourse, an Enlightenment system of thought. Now, in addition to the emergence of the sciences, the normative, social, and behavioral and medical sciences, the physical sciences, right? We can also, when we talk about the Enlightenment, we can also include a series of philosophical and political ideas that emerge simultaneously with the sciences, the social and the physical sciences, okay? So when I talk about the Enlightenment, and when we talk about the Enlightenment as a metaphysical system of thought, we're going to talk about it in three categories. Okay, this is really important. And by the way, you know this, right? This is not mysterious to you, or this is not abstract to you. This is your reality. But putting it in this way sounds kind of clumsy. So when we talk about the Enlightenment as a metaphysical system of thought, we're going to talk about it in three different categories, just for the sake of argument, just to make the conversation easier, right? But we're going to talk about it in three different categories that are kind of now reinforcing each other, that happen simultaneously, okay? All right, and so when we think of the Enlightenment, we can think of it as consisting of three main areas of thought, three main categories, right? And practices that function together, okay? And these three main areas, categories of the Enlightenment as a big discourse, as a paradigm, as a metaphysical system of thought, these three different categories that make up the Enlightenment, we can think of as philosophy, philosophical element of the Enlightenment. Of course, as we keep saying, the normative, social, and behavioral and medical sciences of the Enlightenment, and the politics of the Enlightenment. All right? We think about these three big categories. If we think about the Enlightenment as a broad, general term for a system of thought that is metaphysical, right? We can think of it as being made up of many, of at least three main elements. Kind of a philosophical part of the Enlightenment. There's the normative, social, and behavioral and medical sciences part of the Enlightenment. And there's the political part of the Enlightenment. Right? Now, obviously, I've broken them up like this just so we can talk about them independently, but obviously these things are happening simultaneously. They're reinforcing each other, right? So let's talk about each one of these parts independently, right? Just so we can see what they are. And then, of course, obviously, we see them, we live them every day as integrated parts of this Enlightenment paradigm, all right? And so the first category, the first primary part of the Enlightenment, right? And again, the Enlightenment as a metaphysical system of thought is the emergence of certain philosophical ideas beginning in the 1600s, right? And this is sometimes what we could also call very generally, we're talking very generally here, the emergence of what we call modern liberal philosophy, modern liberal political philosophy. And I don't mean ideology. I'm not talking left, right, not Democrats, Republicans. I'm not talking ideology. I'm talking about the emergence, beginning in the 1600s, of what could be called modern liberal political philosophy as a set of philosophical ideas that you and I take generally as objectively true, right? And by the way, you know what all of these are. You are these ideas. Everyone here is in some way or another defined by and committed to. Everybody, every person in this class, and me, and everybody in America, kind of now, not anymore, but at one point 50 years ago, right? Everybody, right, would have been defined by and committed to these philosophical ideas, and committed and defined by and committed to them as quasi or fairly objectively true things, right? You and I are the heirs of modern liberal political philosophy. Despite our ideological differences, doesn't matter whether you're a member of the Republican Party or the Democrat. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the modern liberal political philosophy, big L, liberal political philosophy, right? And so what are those ideas? And again, these are familiar, right? The first main idea, right? Beginning in the 1600s, a series of philosophical ideas begin to emerge in Europe, in Hobbes, in Locke, in the Scottish Enlightenment philosophers like Adam Smith, later on the French Enlightenment philosophers like Diderot and Rousseau, right? Beginning in the 1600s, right? There begins to emerge a series of philosophical ideas that will kind of coalesce into what we call modern liberal philosophy, modern liberal political philosophy, right? And there are I'll just identify 5 core elements of this. Maybe there's more. There's 5 core ones that we can identify. And again, none of this is abstract to you. You and I are fully committed to these ideas. And the first idea of modern liberal political philosophy as a system of thought, part of the Enlightenment paradigm, is this idea that human beings are objectively free, right? There's this core foundational philosophical idea that human beings are originally and objectively free and ought to be, in terms of what's possible in the legal and political space, ought to be as objectively free as possible, right? In the Enlightenment and in modern liberal political philosophy, we take that philosophical idea as something that's close to an objective truth as you can imagine. People are objectively free. And they ought to be as free as legal and political institutions and shared life will permit, right? That people kind of this abstract philosophical idea of objective freedom means that you and I stand prior to and before government, right? If you've had modern political theory with me, we talk about people are objectively free and their original condition is a state of nature, right? We theorize and philosophize as human freedom as a condition of our existence that exists prior to the creation of the political order. In fact, it's that objective freedom and the consent that derives from that objective freedom that authorizes what we call democracy, right? That's where democracy and consent gets its legitimacy, right? And in the Enlightenment, you and I believe as a deep philosophical idea that humans are objectively free, right? And that they ought to be as free as humanly possible under, certain arrangements of legal and social and political institutions, right? And again, at a deeper level, the reason why we see this as a kind of almost an objective truth is again, we're free. Like nobody, there are no, when we conceive of ourselves as objectively free, we're saying that there are no legitimate natural or religious reasons or aristocratic reasons why anybody rules anybody else, right? There are no naturally occurring reasons or justifications for why Nick Dungy rules the rest of you, right? There are no naturally occurring justifications for why I should rule over you, right? If one day I do rule over you, it's only because through democratic institutions and mechanisms, you've given me your consent. I've run for office as Nick Dungy, right? The Nick Dungy party, right? And talked about my platform and you guys said, cool, here's my vote, and you go rule, right? I rule because you consent. Why do you consent? How can you consent? Because you're objectively and originally and naturally free, right? As a kind of philosophical argument. So the first core philosophical idea of this part is the fact that human beings are objectively free. That no one has a natural right or justification to rule over you without your consent. And if they try to do it, they're violating some moral law, right? Of course. And by the way, that philosophical idea becomes really the foundation for the political side of the Enlightenment. The fact that we arrange ourselves in something like democratic institutions and processes where people have power because other people give their consent, right? That's what gives it legitimacy. All right, so that's the first one. You and I see ourselves as objectively free. All right, if I come to the class, right, or I find you on the street and I try to dominate you, right, I try to restrict your freedom in various ways, right, without legitimacy, right, I'm violating not just a law, obviously, I'm violating a kind of a natural right you have, right, I'm violating a kind of moral law, right, I'm unjustly, illegitimately denying, constraining, restricting your freedom, right? We take that as a kind of an objectively true idea. It's powerful. It's one of the deep philosophical cores of the Enlightenment. Don't tell me how to live. Who the hell are you to tell me how to live? Right? Who the hell are you to restrict my freedom? As long as I'm obeying the law, who are you to tell me what to fucking do? I'm free. Freedom is an objective condition of my being. Okay. First idea.
Hey, Professor?
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you. So I was kind of confused. You said no one has an objective rule over you. That's
Yep.
what you said?
That's right. No one has a natural justification for ruling over me without my consent.
Justification, right?
Yep, justification.
Thank you so much.
You got it, Jennifer. Okay. All right. But again, I don't want to belabor this. You guys know this. You guys are living this. Right? This is who we are philosophically at a deep level. All right. Second point. It's not just that we claim that human beings are and ought to be as objectively free as humanly possible. We also are fully philosophically committed, even though it's coming to an end, but we try to be historically committed to the idea that human beings are morally equal, right? It's a core philosophical idea of modern liberal political philosophy. Human beings are objectively equal. right? Now, to be sure, there might be differences in talent or baseball talent or some people are born into wealthy families, some people are not, some people are talented like Mike Trout and not talented like Nick Dungy. Okay, there might be all sorts of kind of differences in abilities. Okay, that's fine. But none of those differences in abilities ever justify why some people rule, right? Everybody is objectively equal. Every life has a kind of objective equal dignity to it. It's a core philosophical principle. It's in the US Constitution as an objective idea. Human beings are equally, they're morally equal. Right? Again, to be sure, not always realized in practice, of course, but as an objective idea. George Clooney is obviously wealthy and talented and beautiful, right? But for all of George Clooney's immense beauty and wealth and talent and charm and charisma, right? Technically speaking, his vote isn't worth more than Nick Dungy's vote. His life isn't worth more than Nick Dungy's life. In a kind of abstract philosophical argument, all life has a kind of equal value. All life has a kind of equal dignity. Human beings are morally equal. Right? It's a core philosophical idea that we're committed to. Human beings are objectively free and human beings are morally equal. Okay. 3, we are absolutely committed to this kind of modern liberal Enlightenment idea that human beings are intensely and irreducibly unique and individual, right? We see each other as people who have fully independent, private, unique, private, and idiosyncratic conceptions of who they are, right? We're a kind of culture, lack of a better term, I'm not even sure if that's the right term, but we're the heirs of a philosophical system that views people as irreducibly individualistic and unique, right? We recognize each other as objectively free, morally equal, and unique. We see each other. When I see you, I recognize a being who possesses in his or her head a set of ideas and desires and interests and views that are irreducibly unique, right? That's how we see each other as fundamentally unique creatures. Yes, of course, we're human and we share natural rights. I get that. But in terms of the content in our minds, the interests and the views and the pleasures and the passions and the likes and the dislikes, right? We see each other as beings who possess a kind of an idiosyncratic, unique, private combination of those things, right? And again, that's a cornerstone of our kind of philosophical view of us, right? I see you and I say, hey, there's, okay, we speak the same language, right? All right, and okay, maybe we say we have natural rights that we share, but when I see you, we are taught philosophically to see each other as fundamentally and irreducibly unique, right? Jacob and I can be friends and we can share an interest in music. We both think the Clash is the very best band in the world. Don't at me at that because it's just true. And maybe we both love the Angels and hate the Dodgers. I mean, we can share all sorts of things, fine. But at the end of the day, we see each other as fundamentally and irreducibly unique creatures, right? Jacob is Jacob and Nick Dungy is Nick Dungy, and that's it. We're autonomous and unique in this deep objective way, right? And we're obsessed with that, right? Right? We and even in pop culture, we say, hey, do you, right? And even in a less flippant sense, one of the core purposes and in one version, the Enlightenment version of this is to figure out who you are, what you're good at, and go out and do it. It's kind of an Enlightenment version of Platonic notions of identity. Right? Okay. All right. And by the way, I'm really pushing on these things, that we're objectively free, that we're morally equal, that we see each other as fundamentally, irreducibly unique creatures, right? Because Foucault is going to take a sledgehammer to all these things. All right, 4, big one. We see ourselves as possessing natural rights as an objective idea, precisely because we're objectively free. We exist prior to and before the emergence of government, precisely because we are morally equal, right? Every life has a equal moral value at some deep level. Precisely because we're individualistic, we see ourselves as possessing natural rights, right? By virtue of being a human being, we say philosophically, by virtue of being a human being, right, I have rights. I have protections against ways that you and government can treat me. By virtue of being a human being, there are some things that no human being or government can do to me without violating some objective morality of my being. That's what it means to have a natural right, right? And we say, respect my right. You're violating my right. The first 10 amendments to the US Constitution, the Bill of Rights, right? Right, the Bill of Rights, right? The Bill of Rights come from the philosophical idea of natural rights. You can't have you can't have constitutional rights, you can't have civil rights, you can't have legal rights if you don't have some philosophical idea of natural rights, right? Yes, of course. Yes, the answer is yes, right? And we are the heirs of a philosophical system of thought that says, by virtue of being a human being, you and I possess rights, natural rights. And therefore, there are some things other people, or especially governments, can never do to us without violating some kind of moral truth, right? It's a very powerful idea. And we take it as true, right? And indeed, right? Many of us are advocates of Amnesty International, right? We donate to Amnesty International. We're supporters of Amnesty International. What the hell do they do? Well, they're a nonprofit, right? Of political scientists and lawyers, Foucault's army of technicians, right? Who spend all year, right, observing all the different governments around the world and documenting all the specific human rights violations these governments practice on their people. Right? And so every year, Amnesty International publishes, sadly, it's a really fucking thick book. It should be thin, but tragically, there's all sorts of governments doing horrific things to fucking people. So every year, Amnesty International publishes a big fucking book. It's like a phone book, like the old school 1970s phone book. It's like fucking thick. And in it, it documents all of the violations of natural rights by the Chinese government, or the Cuban government, or the North Korean government, or the Senegalese government. It documents violations of natural rights. And it produces this document as a kind of claim against these governments. Hey, you're violating a moral law. You're fucking fundamentally immoral. You're unjust. You're violating human rights. And so in the Enlightenment, we take that as an objectively true idea. Right? And even on a smaller level, right? If I come into the class, God forbid, and I've lost my mind, say, and I come into the class and I say, okay, I just lost my mind, right? And I'm gonna throw out all the women in the class. I'm not gonna teach them. Don't think they should be taught. Think their place is in the home and not the classroom. Like I said, I've lost my fucking mind. You can count the ticks on your clock before my phone rings and I'm out of a job, right? Again, where I get a call from the dean, right? Literally, you can count the click, 10, 4, 6, ring. Oh, hi, dean. Did you just violate the natural and civil rights of half your fucking students? No, it wasn't me. Right? I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble because I've violated your civil right. I've denied to you some education or some access, right? That you have a right to, not just a civil right, but grounded in a natural right. We take that as an objectively true idea. It's powerful. And the third idea, right? No, not the third, the fifth idea, in the philosophical element of the Enlightenment, we treat kind of politics, especially liberal democratic politics, as a kind of superior way of organizing institution and power, right? In the modern Enlightenment, modern West, modern Enlightenment, right? We make this argument that democratic regimes are better than totalitarian regimes, right? Hence all the crisis and the debate about what's happening now, right? Literally, the last 5 days before the election, they weren't even anymore about Biden and Trump. Of course they are, but they wasn't even about it. Everything on Twitter. This is a debate. This is an election about democracy or authoritarianism. That's what it was. That's what it boiled down to. This is an election about the soul of a country. This is an election about democracy or authoritarianism. Right? And obviously the suggestion is, fuck, vote democracy. Are you crazy voting for authoritarian? What the fuck is wrong with you? Right? That's the suggestion. Right? So, in the Enlightenment, in the philosophical component of the Enlightenment, we tend to think, we do think quite strongly that democratic systems of government, democratic institutions, democratic processes are superior to other forms of government. And we make that as a kind of a quasi-objective argument, right? When people say, right, that the American democracy, I'm just using this as an example, that American democracy is preferable to North Korean authoritarianism, they're not just saying, yeah, it's better because there's more food to buy and there's Netflix and the internet, right? Okay, that's true. But they're not saying that American democracy is preferable just because of those things. They're saying American democracy, liberal democracy, forget American, liberal democracy is superior to North Korean style authoritarianism because under systems of liberal democracy, people flourish. They don't starve. They're not terrified. They're not randomly executed. They're not living in fear. They tend to thrive more than they do. And we make an objective argument that they thrive more. Right? And so we take that as a kind of objective claim. It's objectively true, we like to say, that human beings thrive better. They have an elevated form of life. They have a superior form and mode of life than people living under different types of institutional and procedural governments like authoritarianism. All right, so when we look at the Enlightenment as a metaphysical system of thought, and we look at just the first component of it, the philosophical component of it, that begins kind of in the 1600s, that develops for several hundred years and goes through its process and is where it is now, we talk about 5 core ideas. People are objectively free. We think that's a true idea. People are objectively free. We think that people are morally equal. We see that as an objectively true idea. Corresponds to some truth out there. We see people as fundamentally and irreducibly unique and individual. We see people as possessing natural rights as a true idea. Not as a cultural norm, as a true idea. And we see legal and institutional and processes of democracy as superior to other forms of government. because we see human beings flourishing in those types as opposed to others. And every one of those ideas, in one way or another, we believe in, we're committed to, we see it as objectively true, and we're committed to its practices. All right, let's stop here. And on Thursday, we'll talk about the next two, and we'll push deeper into this. All right?
Thank you.
Yep, love you guys so damn much. Yep, just miss you guys. Love you guys so damn much. And I will get the midterms to you by Monday. And I'm so grateful for your patience and your love.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Nick.
Bye, you guys.